Main frame. Bring this thing a little lower, I guess. Put it up. All right. Let's wait for people to show up for a sec. How you guys doing? Well, I might as well just start talking. So I'm only going to be on for a little bit, like maybe 15 minutes. So people watching this after the fact, the 100 of you or so who watch the videos after I post them up, you're not like, waiting for me to get started. Um, so I'll just get right to it. I'll talk about right now the things that I don't like about a raw diet, and then I'll go through the three basic arguments for a raw diet, and we can talk about that, and then we'll do a roll call, see where everybody's at, see how they're doing, and what they feed their dogs. And if they have good points, and I'll read them off, and you can hear them too. So I only really have two problems with the raw diet. Well, maybe three, but let's just talk about two. Um, One is our food supply, like for humans, is pretty safe for us. Especially in the United States, not everywhere in the world, but in the United States, it's generally safe. We can eat most things rare. Pathogens are generally eliminated for humans. Foodborne illnesses are relatively rare, although they do happen. Um, but uh, we're looking for parasites and pathogens that affect humans and not dogs. So there are some scenarios where we allow pathogens into our food supply and we don't think about it. For instance, Pacific Northwest, the salmon tend to have a parasite that our bodies can readily deal with, and it's no problem. But if you give it to a dog, they develop salmon poisoning, which is due to the parasite that's in the salmon. Because we're not sifting our food and looking for pathogens for dogs in our food supply. We're not intending to give them the raw food. It's not part of the process that we make things safe. We're not thinking about dogs. So that doesn't mean that, you give your dog some meat, it's going to get sick. Most likely it's going to be fine. 99.999% of the time it's going to be fine. But it's very easy to kill most pathogens. We've been doing it since before we even had dogs. All you have to do is heat it up for an hour or so or less, and all the pathogens magically are all dead, and it's completely safe. And it's the same thing for dogs. If you want to give your dog rare chicken, um, near raw chicken, you can do that safely and you can kill all the salmonella on the chicken. All you have to do is put it in a vacuum seal bag or a Ziploc bag, take the air out, put it in your slow cooker on a keep warm setting, which gets it to about 160 degrees for about 3 hours, and then there's no more salmonella to worry about. You can go even lower temperatures if you have a sous vide machine and you know about sous vide. You can look it up on other people's YouTube channels. You can get really rare chicken that's safe to eat with very little water loss from the meat or the bones, which is the main problem that most people talk about when they're saying you shouldn't give your dog hot food because the bones become brittle and sharp and they shatter. Well, if you cook it this way at very low temperatures, you both kill the salmonella and other pathogens, and you allow the bones to stay hydrated for the most part. So you avoid that problem. So there's really no reason in my mind to allow for the risk of pathogens into your dog's food supply. So that's number one. The second thing that that I have a problem with is generally there's sort of misconception, I think, about dogs being exactly equivalent to wolves. So a dog is like a wolf in about it is about the same distance from a wolf as we are from our very last ancestor. Like before agriculture, before everything. That's when dogs were co-evolving with us. So they're very similar to us in that regard that their genomes are as different from their ancestors as ours are from our primitive ancestors. And you can actually you can actually look for differences in genes in dogs and wolves. One of the very interesting ones and most relevant for this particular topic is the number of copies of the enzyme that breaks down starches and carbohydrates, amylase. So humans produce amylase, and the number of copies you have is correlated with the amount of amylase you secrete in your saliva. So when you stick a piece of potato, like a cooked potato, or you probably have heard of this in elementary school, or like some bread in your mouth and you let it sit there, it starts to taste sweet. And the reason why, for most of us, it starts to taste sweet is because we're secreting this enzyme called amylase, and it's breaking down those carbohydrates into simpler sugars, and that's setting off our sugar receptors on our tongues, and you're sensing the sweet flavors of those sugars that are breaking down. Dogs, wolves in particular, have a very low number of copies of their own gene that produces amylase. Something like 60% of them have like 2 copies or something like this. Most domesticated dogs, like most of them, except for the ones that are in the Arctic and the ones that are wild in Australia, like dingoes, produce high numbers of they have a large number of copies of this gene, which has been is suggestive that they can break down carbohydrates more readily than wolves. And it makes sense because as humans became agricultural, we had to start storing foods to survive through the times where we couldn't get foods readily around, from the crops and stuff like that. One of the ways that we stored food was like by storing carbohydrates, like rice and wheat. And if dogs were around, they needed to be able to break that down. So dogs that had an advantage of breaking that down stuck around. So most dogs have something like 10 copies of this gene, which is very similar to humans who have 10 copies of the gene. Dogs that don't include like Siberian Huskies have like 6. Most domesticated dogs still have significantly more copies on average than wolves do. But the point is that your dog has co-evolved along with you to eat very similar sorts of foods that you do, because that's who they've been depending on for their food sources for a really long time. As long as there's been agriculture, just as long as you've been depending on those carbohydrates. So those are the 2 main reasons that I have. One is sort of it's dangerous too. It's the idea for, the base reason for doing it is sort of spurious. And there are a couple of pros to it. And a lot of people who I've seen online who have been giving their dogs raw diet really are big advocates of it. And it makes sense why they do it. And I'll go over those right now. So one thing that happens with humans and also dogs is that we have very complex immune systems. And when you introduce proteins, any kind of protein, from a plant or an animal, our immune systems can react to those proteins and attack them as invaders. This is generally this is generally called an allergy, right? So we get them. We can have allergic responses to gluten, to all sorts of different proteins. My dad, for instance, he's allergic to pork. He still eats it, but he's allergic to pork. Your dog can have similar sensitivities to different things. They're not all the same. So if you hear that, this particular protein is bad, or don't feed your dog chicken because every dog is bad for dogs, or something like that. Well, that's not exactly true. Many dogs have different sets of allergies, just the way that humans might have different sets of allergies. So if a person buying an industrial dog food gets it, you don't really know what's in it, and you give it to your dog, and they start, losing fur, and they generally have a bad GI response to it. There's probably an allergy there, and you should find it. And a good way to do that would be to do what we do as humans, which is to start to isolate different proteins and start feeding your dog those things. So in that regard, I am pro giving your dog food that you know what it is. But that's where I draw the line. You don't have to give your dog raw food to do that. It could be cooked. So, for instance, what we do is I tend to buy whole chickens, and I cut them up. Like I cut up the breasts and the legs and everything, and we cook that, and you're left with the carcass and all the other stuff. So normally in a raw diet, you would just give the animal the carcass, and it would, your dog would just have at it. And the salmonella, which could be present throughout the chicken. There's definitely stuff growing on it, because it will go bad quickly if you don't cook it. You could do this experiment yourself. Don't cook a chicken, and you let it sit, and you cook a chicken, you let it sit. The one that you cooked is going to take longer to go, to develop weird stuff grown on it. It's because there's already stuff growing on the chicken when you haven't, before you cooked it. So, but besides that, I take the carcass, and then I will throw it into a big pot and some salt, and boil that sucker down. And you're left with is like a bone broth and some bone that is not shrapnel-y, but will disintegrate quickly. And then just, she's getting the same nutrients. You give her that. And in addition, you get a small amount of gelatin that you can add to whatever food you want that she might, your dog might be bored of. I'll show you this. Hold on. So this stuff here, it's gelatin from breaking down, she likes it. It's just standard soup base, but it also has, because you cook it for so long and all the, it's bone broth, right? So you can add that to dog food on occasion, or to whatever else they're eating. It's no problem. She didn't have to eat raw food. And that brings me to my last point, is that if you are immune compromised, or you're older, or you have kids, like babies, young kids, whenever a dog eats things that wouldn't hurt you, for instance, that would hurt you, like salmonella, doesn't really bother your dog for the most part. They could get sick if they are also immune compromised. But for the most part, they're probably going to be fine. and it's going to pass right through the GI tract, and they're going to, crap it out outside. And that's not the end of the story, though. Wherever they were eating, right, unless it's consistently decontaminated, is a growing contamination issue. What's coming out of their backside and what's on their backside is also a contamination issue. So wherever they're sleeping, wherever they're rubbing their butt on the ground, that's all contaminated. And so if you're living with little kids, which family dogs tend to be living with little kids, or you're much older, your dog can be a source of salmonella contamination if you give them a raw diet. But that being said, they're already a source for contamination of other, bacterial issues that they have just normally just going on. So that's sort of like a weird point, but it is true. You can contaminate yourself with salmonella by letting your dog eat raw food and then having them being in close proximity to you. If you're older, immune compromised, or you are a very small child, this can be a problem. So these are my main concerns with raw diet, and for that reason, I think that most people probably should steer clear of it unless you're probably you're fine. You're like, maybe you're in your 20s or whatever, and you don't care about that. But it just seems to me like why even have the possibility of contaminating your apartment or your house or whatever with salmonella if you can just cook the food. You're already cooking food. Just cook the food. Yeah, or just give them kibble and it's not a problem. So that's it. That's my story. So what do you guys give your dogs? Are you guys all, right now, I mean, I'm sure we're all giving them kibble because that's what you can store in bulk for a while, but what do you normally give your dogs? Oh, I guess not. I guess we're all quiet. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Oh, wait. Ah. Oh, yeah. That's a very good, yeah. It's very good dog food. Yeah, I do that too. I do a mixture of kibble and just scraps and stuff. Yeah. Where, thanks, Eric. Where are you watching us from? Are you guys still freely walking around out there, or Annapolis, Maryland? You still walking around out there, or are you locked down like we are? I think you guys are still walking around. Oh, you guys are locked down. Well, be safe out there. Also, anybody who's watching, or anybody who, if you want to come back or whatever and listen to this stuff, we're here. In these times, like, it kind of helps just to talk to people. If you have nothing else to do and you can't really communicate outside, I'll probably be back. I don't know. These live shows have not been a screaming success, but I might be back next week. We'll see what happens. Take care. Talk to you later.